Hello once again and welcome to episode 4 of The Briefing Room, and this week we will be talking to Professor Peter Hayes, the author of Why Explaining the Holocaust. It's going to be an in-depth conversation, it's going to be a sensitive conversation, so those of you who are especially sensitive, this is a trigger warning for you. We will be talking about the killing of the Jews, we will be talking about the killing of disabled, as well as politics, as well as a lot of things, but all to do with the Holocaust, which is probably the most horrific part of our history. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm really looking forward to this. Professor Peter Hayes is highly thought of, and this book is amazing. So, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the other side. Now, history. Okay, welcome Professor Peter Hayes to the Briefing Room. And your book, Why Explaining the Holocaust. Okay, on the camera there.
There we go.
And, and I'll put a link down below so that people can get a copy of that. I thought it was very educational, even though I've read a lot of on World War II and the Holocaust. That was very educational. It was horrifying in places, and I couldn't put it down. So it was an excellent read, and I think it's a read that for everybody as well, for academics and non-academics. How did your experiences teaching Holocaust studies shape the structure and the content of the book?
Well, that's an excellent question. The book actually emerged out of teaching because I taught at a university that had an unusual academic schedule, much more like a British term schedule than an American semester schedule.
Mm-hmm.
That meant that I had to get the history of the Holocaust into about 9 weeks, which when you're giving standard lectures and so forth, most American courses last 16 weeks. You have a lot more room to tell the story. And the normal pattern of a history course is to basically be chronological.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do that because in 9 weeks, you cannot tell the story from beginning to end. The Holocaust has long antecedents. It has a long trail afterwards. So I had to figure out a way to package the material. And after about 3 or 4 years of struggling with this, I realized the way to package it was according to the questions that my students kept asking. And I realized that they came in with certain things that they didn't understand, and they wanted to know what those were. For instance, why the Jews? Why is it that this focus of hatred narrowed in on this group of people, which is a very, very small group of people as part of the European population?
Yeah.
Why did that happen? Why were the Germans the people who brought this to a crescendo? Because after all, if we know anything, if a person knows anything about anti-Semitism, they know about the Dreyfus Affair, which happened in France, or they know about the pogroms in Russia in the end of the 19th century and so forth. None of this happened in Germany. So why the Germans? And then you go on and you discover there are other questions. The American students tend to be a little naive about the force of individual heroism in the world.
Yeah.
And so they often ask, why didn't they fight back more? I find that the worst question about the Holocaust that can be posed, because the presupposition there is that they could have done something effective to stop this.
Yeah.
And when you think of the massive power of the German state and the enormous population advantage that the killers had over the people they were targeting, the chances of stemming this were very small. And so there were a series of questions that arose out of my students, and then I structured the book around those questions, which enabled me to teach in 9 weeks, because I would devote 1 week to each question. And then along about 2014, as I was approaching retirement, I realized, well, there's no book out there that does this. So why don't I try to memorialize my work, if you will, or extend its reach and so forth, and turn it into a book. And that's what I did. So this is a book that came out of teaching the subject, and it is addressed to the most pressing questions that I think people have about the subject.
Yeah.
Um, most, the thing about the Holocaust that is a kind of commonplace is people often say that it's incomprehensible. You cannot grasp the depth of this cruelty,
Mm.
or and that is a comforting thought. It tells because it distances us from the possibility of doing this or the possibility of suffering this. We sort of exile this to the unfathomable. And I think it's not unfathomable. It can be understood the way any other historical event may or may not be understood. And so I tried to write a book that provided a way of understanding how this incredibly vicious thing could unfold
Mm.
and how hundreds of thousands of people could participate in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that's a distancing thing? Do you think that people don't want to think that they are capable of that? That they think this
Absolutely.
that the Holocaust is otherworldly and it's not of our world?
I could never do that,
No.
is the premise that people are proceeding
Yeah.
from. And then to reinforce their stance, they say, well, of course, it's incomprehensible. How could anyone do that?
Yeah.
But in fact, it is not easy, but it is not terribly difficult to explain how human beings come to participate in this.
Yeah.
Um, it's normal human social psychological processes that lead people to believe absolutely phantasmagorical things.
Yeah.
One of the reviews of my book had a sentence in it that I thought was really quite powerful. It said, "This book demonstrates that under certain circumstances, people can rationalize anything."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's true. Very true. Um,
yeah.
what was your greatest challenge writing about something that is obviously a very emotional subject?
I think my greatest challenge was the tone of voice, is
Yeah.
to keep the tone of
Your
voice,
your tone of voice, yeah.
my tone of voice,
Yeah.
to keep the tone of voice not matter of fact, but um, moderate. We are talking about terrible cruelties inflicted upon people
Yeah.
for reasons that make no sense at all, and yet you have to make that somehow intelligible, not
Yeah.
intelligent, not legitimate,
Well,
but
nothing about it is intelligent, is it really?
no, no. And
Yeah.
so the hardest thing is the tone of voice.
Yeah.
And I became involved a couple of years ago, maybe now 5 years ago, with Ken Burns, the American documentarian who made a series of TV programs about the United States and the Holocaust.
Yeah.
He has a historian who writes his scripts, um, and I cherish the remark that this man made to me when we first met. He said, "I cannot believe your restraint." And that's what I tried for. I tried for calm
Mm.
in describing this because emotion, if you don't feel emotion in the face of this material, you're just not a human being.
Yeah.
So emotion is easy. Um, Calm and dispassionate analysis is what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was reading it, sometimes I was turning my face away from the page. I was reacting that strongly to it.
Yep.
And it is just horrific, absolutely horrific, some of the things that happened there. And I mean, in your book, you discuss the economic and social conditions of the Weimar Weimar Germany, and how did the conditions create the opportunity for Hitler to take power?
Without the situation of Germany in the 1920s, which was born of two interacting things. One was the defeat in the war.
Mm-hmm.
Second was the economic ups and downs, the roller coaster ride of the German economy. Without those things, hundreds of thousands of Germans would not have been groping for a simple explanation for what was happening to them. And the Nazis provided the simplest of possible explanations.
Hmm.
Bad people did this to you. It's not your fault that your leaders led you into a futile war in 1914. It's not your fault that the military commanders of the German army failed to win the war. It is what has happened to you is not the cause of Germans. It was not caused by Germans. It was caused by people who wanted to persecute Germany. And then the easiest thing was to finger those people. The Allies were one part of the problem, the British, the French, the
Yeah.
Americans. But the leftists who rose in rebellion after the German Empire lost the war, they were then fingered as people who had stabbed the country in the back. And behind the leftists, said the Nazis, are always the Jews. So it comes down to this tiny sliver of the German population, which in 1925 is basically just under 1% of the German population, the
Hmm.
German Jews. And what the Nazis peddle is the simple explanation that these people were behind everything that you are suffering. And therefore, the solution to everything you're suffering is to get rid of these people.
Yeah.
And this was the simple lesson repeated over and over again. Of course, it works in politics because it was in part flattering. It was you suffered the humiliation of defeat. You've suffered the economic after effects, which included an inflation of the German currency in 1923 to the point that it was worth 4.2 trillion marks to a dollar. This was literally not worth the paper it was
Wow.
printed. And then you have 5 years later, after that inflation is overcome, then you have the stock market crash and the calling in of loans on which the German economy depended, which deepens the unemployment in Germany because when the loans are called in, companies have to repay those loans. They don't have the profit margin to repay it, so they cut back. And then demand falls and it's a downward spiral. So this is the Germans in 1932 had almost a third of the workforce out of work. The maybe 4 in 10 Germans who had jobs in 1928 still had them in 1932. I mean, it was a
Um,
cataclysm. And into this environment come the Nazis saying, "We alone know how to fix this." And we're going to reassert our national greatness. We're going to tell the Allies basically to go to hell with all of the restrictions they placed upon us. And we're going to remove, this was the word the Nazis kept using. We're going to remove the Jews from their influence in German life. And out of this will come a great, glorious revival. And so this is the message they send. It's worth remembering that it was a powerful message. It made the Nazis the biggest political party in Germany,
mhm.
but they never got a majority. When Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister, in January 1933, 55% of the Germans had never voted for him.
Yeah.
So this is a minority dedicated to this fanatical, crazy set of ideas who get power. And once they get power, they sweep everybody else aside and they begin indoctrinating the rest of the country and intimidating some of them into supporting that ideology.
When you were talking then, you could almost transfer that very idea over to America now.
You could, and some of us who are in the business are deeply troubled by the parallels.
Yeah.
Uh, it's it keeps me awake at night.
Yeah. I can imagine. And and what was the most common misconception about the Jewish experience during the Holocaust that you aim to correct in your book?
Wow, there are so many. I mean, well, let me pick up with what I just said first. Anti-Semitism.
Hmm.
The most common misconception I think many people have is that Germans were predominantly anti-Semitic, and therefore Hitler comes to power because Germans embrace his anti-Semitism. That's not totally inaccurate, but it's a little bit off. The reason I think is because what most Germans were they were not anti-Semitic. they had been corrupted by generations of prejudice
Mm.
into having a vague suspicion about Jews. Not the kind of thing where the Nazis said they're all conspiring against Germany, they're all evil, and so on, but just a vague sort of sense that I'm not one of them. I'm not going to stick up for them because I don't really know who they are. And maybe there's some truth to this. And so the biggest problem was that in Germany in 1932, 33, when the Nazis come in, there aren't enough anti-Semites.
Mm.
And therefore, no one stands up for the community. The defense of them is very lukewarm at most. And the Nazis roll right over that because they
Yeah.
say, look, we know the real essence of these people, and we're going to now teach you. And this is what happens between 1933 and 1939. We're going to teach most Germans to be anti-Semitic. And they do this, as I implied before, by a
Hmm.
mix of intimidation. They threaten people, indoctrination. They have total control over the media, the press, and so forth, education. They teach people over and over again the Jews are the problem. And then there's one third ingredient, which also starts with an I, because I taught students and it's easy to remember these things. Intoxication.
Yeah.
Germans became intoxicated with the success of the Nazis because they do whip the depression very fast.
Yeah.
By 1936, there's full employment in Germany. They do it by means that are not sustainable over time, but they don't have to be. For Hitler, the idea was get the economy going, get it oriented around war, then we'll conquer people. And out of the profits of the conquest, we will live happily ever after.
Hmm.
So just has to work for a short period of time until living space is acquired. And so he orients the economy around war. He devotes all of the muscle of the German state into providing money for that enterprise. And that is enough for him to remilitarize the Rhineland in 1936, unify with Austria in 1938, intimidate Britain and France into the acquisition of the Sudetenland at
Hmm.
the Munich conference in 1938, and then in 1939 to march into what is today's Czech Republic, and take it over. And all of this is bloodless success. The Germans are just drunk with this. They think after all those years of humiliation after 1918, as the German phrase goes, wir sind wieder wer. We're somebody again.
Mm.
And these three things, intimidation, indoctrination, intoxication, they allow Hitler to become massively more popular than he was when he was appointed chancellor in 1933. So this country is transformed in that 5 years between 33 and 38. And of course, with regard to the Holocaust, the symbol of that transformation is the pogrom in November 1938, when the
Hmm.
synagogues are burned, the shops are smashed, 30,000 Jewish men are sent to concentration camps. None of that had happened on a large scale before. And
Yeah.
we have to ask ourselves, why does it happen now? And one of the reasons is that Hitler has just had this a few weeks before this great success at the Munich conference. He thinks he can get away with it.
Yeah. And he does.
And he does.
He
He
does.
can get away with it with his own people. They don't resist. He can get away with it with the French and the British and the Americans because they don't interfere.
Yeah. And that's what we've been talking about that with a couple of people, how the French and the British were just like, oh yeah, okay, we're not getting involved yet.
Right.
Yeah, it's
And of course,
unbelievable.
that was the diplomatic mentality of the day. You don't interfere in the domestic affairs of another country.
Mm.
So the attitude in Britain and France was if they want to do that, that's their problem, not ours. Our problem is defending our national interests and so forth.
Yeah.
So Chamberlain and Daladier were thinking about their empires. They were thinking about the carnage of the last war. They wanted to head that off in any way they could. And that's what they tried at Munich. And Munich was the last gasp of appeasement in that way. And
Yeah.
after that, people learned you can't buy this guy off. You can't satisfy him because what he wants is so extensive.
Yeah. And you state in your book that there is no single theory that explains the Holocaust. Can you elaborate on the convergence of multiple forces?
Well, when I said that, of course, what I'm thinking of the Holocaust as meaning mass murder,
Mhm.
and culminating in this, because this comes out of a confluence of events. I mean, it starts, of course, with a heritage of anti-Semitism that the Nazis activate and intensify, and is not confined to Germany. It is rampant in Hungary, it's rampant in Romania, it's rampant in Poland. People often forget that one of the reasons why the British government and the American government were so resistant to immigration in the 1930s is they didn't think the pressure was just about the German Jews. There were only 500,000 German Jews. You could, in a rational world, British and American politicians could have said, we can easily take in 500,000 people.
Mhm.
There's plenty of room for that. Why didn't they? Why were they so reluctant? Until the pogrom of 1938, Britain was largely resistant to people coming in, and so was the United States. And the pogrom opened those doors wide for about a year before the war began in September of 1939. So, why were people so resistant? Because Poland had 3 million Jews, and the Polish ambassador to Great Britain in 1938 was trying to persuade the British government to make a British colony, available for the emigration of Polish Jewry. And the Polish ambassador actually said to the British Foreign Office, if you don't cooperate with us on this, we will be forced to adopt measures in our country like the Germans have adopted in theirs. Can you imagine this?
Wow. Yeah.
Polish government threatening to do similar things. The Romanians asked the League of Nations in early 1939 for help in reducing their Jewish population. So the big fear in these countries was 5 million Eastern European Jews being pushed out. And this reinforced the fears of what the German word in those days was inundation, Überschwemmung.
Yeah.
And so all of these countries are thinking about their own interests. They're not thinking about what's happening to Jews in Germany. They're thinking about how do we deal with these threats. And in this case, nowadays we've largely forgotten the threat to the Eastern European Jews at that time because we know what happens later with the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Now, the roads that lead to murder are very closely tied to the war. Because remember, Hitler's psychosis about the Jews, his obsession, is related to his belief as to why Germany lost the First World War. He thought Germany lost the First World War because the army was stabbed in the back and the people who did it were mostly Jews. And so in the coming war, there had to be no Jews behind the lines because
Mhm.
they were definition saboteurs. Now, the problem for that imagination was that the territories that Hitler wanted for his living space were also the territories in Europe most densely populated with Jews: Poland,
Yeah.
Ukraine, the Baltic states, Belarus. And that was to be the empire of living space. And that's where there were a lot of Jews. So there's a certain mathematical contradiction built into Nazi ideology. We're going to conquer that world, but we also need to have a Jew-free empire.
Mhm.
And this contradiction is what leads to the Holocaust. The Nazis increasingly recognize it, but up until 1937, late 1937, there's no sign that it has dawned on them yet. And then beginning in 1937-38, the run up to Munich, via the takeover of Austria, they suddenly realize every time we expand, we get more Jews. And that wipes out our gains in driving Jews out up until now. See,
Mhm.
there's a circularity
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And they try various ways of getting rid of Jews. They try to make life so miserable for them that they will leave Germany. Then, after the pogrom, they plan forced expulsions, deportations. Then, when they conquer Poland, they gather people along railheads in ghettos, preparatory to sending them somewhere else. Their visions of where else uh, run from the Arctic Circle after they conquer Russia
Mm.
to the island of Madagascar, a French colony off the African coast. As those visions don't work, they run out of options. And this is the moment when they decide we have to kill them. And they do that in two stages. They conclude as they are preparing the invasion of the Soviet Union in the spring of 1941, they conclude that we don't want to repeat what happened in Poland in 1939. In Poland, we marched in, killed a lot of people, only a few of them were Jews. We gathered all the rest of the Jews in these ghettos. Then we had to administer the ghettos. We had to feed them at a minimal level. It was all a pain. It was a
Mm.
hassle. When we go into Russia, we're going to kill most of them first and keep only a small number to work for us, the opposite of what we did in Poland.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then several months later, once they have done all of this shooting and killed about 1 million people in the path of the armies, they realize, well, we can now apply this method to the areas that we conquered before, except we won't shoot them because that people will see that and there might be discomfort or difficulties. Much easier if we just round them up in the occupied countries and send them to secluded places where we can kill them. And then we now know because they had experimented with this method on people in mental institutions in Germany in 1940. They said it's more efficient to kill them in batches and cheaper than to kill them individually with bullets. So we'll put them in enclosed chambers, we'll pump gas in and large number. So there's this kind of learning process that they go through in 1941
Yeah.
leads to the death camps. And the first gassings occur. There's an experimental gassing. It's in September of 1941 at Auschwitz. Then there's the first systematic gassings at Chelmno in December of 1941. And then in the beginning of 1942, the death camps proper really open up. And the massacre is incredibly compressed. Half the victims of the Holocaust die in only 11 months between March of
Jesus.
1942 and February of 1943.
Yeah. Unbelievable. It's no wonder that people ask the question, why can people do this?
Mhm. Because they become convinced of absolutely crazed ideas.
Yeah.
This small group of internally diverse people are all alike. They are all conspiring against us. The world will be better when they are all gone.
And of
It's a,
course, they dehumanize
of
the
course,
Jews as well, don't they? That they're
sure.
they're not even human.
Right. And that's, of course, the strategy behind the ghettos.
Yeah.
Make them look as bad as we say they are,
Mm.
because they are immiserated to the extent that the worst, not always, but the worst is brought out in people,
Yeah.
as well as the best. There are heroic people in the ghettos who do remarkable things, and there are people who break, just as any human community will respond in that way.
Yeah.
There, you know,
And your book also argues against the idea of the Holocaust being inscrutable and mysterious. Why is it important to approach this topic from a historical as well as an analytical lens?
because if we have to understand how it happened in order to prevent it from happening again, we
Mm.
have to see the signs of the gathering of force. We have to know what kinds of arguments we're faced with. We have to know what you have to stop in order to prevent this.
Mm.
And, the problem for many of us, and particularly in the United States right now, is we have believed that the only thing you can do is educate people and to prevent the recurrence of this, to show people that to dehumanize any group of people can lead in this direction,
Yeah.
to overgeneralize about any group of people can lead in this direction. Um, to remember to make an idol of your own kind of people and make them, as the Nazis did, the model for all things, can also lead in this direction. These are
Yeah.
all the things that we have to teach people not to do. In the United States right now, I mean, a lot of us are in a crisis because we have been teaching this for years and years, and we used to believe we were getting somewhere, and right now we're not sure we are
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there are people prepared to believe these generalizing views about whole categories of human beings.
Hmm. And when you look at the government that America has now, and you look at the Nazis, there's a lot of crossover. A lot of crossover. There's the us and them. There's the vilifying of certain groups of people. There's the deportation of certain groups of people, and
Yep.
it's yeah, it's scary.
The, and the diabolization of people to
Yeah.
turn them into devils. No, it's very scary, and then you add to that you know the comparison people in this country in after 2016, the tendency was to talk a lot about, is Trump Hitler and so on, and that's not the point. The point, because Trump and Hitler are very, very different characters and mentalities and backgrounds and all of this. Um, One thing that's in favor of us in the United States is in 1933, Adolf Hitler was 44 years old. And right now, Donald Trump is 79 years old.
Yeah.
And the actuarial tables are on our side. But the real comparison was with the followers. The real comparison was the kind of people who were drawn to Hitler and the kind of people who were drawn to Trump.
Mm.
Uh, and that and that is truly alarming. Because we now he has the capacity of to just allocate military resources. That's his substitute for the stormtroopers,
Yeah.
and so that this is also very alarming. Um, but there are people who have given themselves totally over to the Trumpian worldview of America as the victimized,
Yeah.
and that and then who's victimizing us? Well, foreigners, but also the internal subversives, the liberals,
Hmm.
and this functions as it did for the Nazis, where they attacked the Reds, the commies,
Yeah.
and uh, so it's very troubling. The comparisons are very troubling.
There's one saving grace that you have now that the 30s didn't have. In the 30s, Hitler controlled the media. Now people call Trump out on his bullshit.
Yeah,
So that's one good thing that
but
you have.
it's one good thing. But we know that the modern form of authoritarianism can put up with a lot of that.
Mm.
They can put up with a lot of people mocking them from the sides or talking freely and so on, as long as they control the money and the offices.
Mm.
And as long as they have some media outlet. They don't have to have a domination of the media like Goebbels. They have to have Fox News,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that suffices. Because that key segment of the population listens only to that and knows only what
Yeah.
that
True.
tells them. And this is how Orban has succeeded in Hungary. But even there, his grasp is tenuous.
Mm.
I don't think that Trump's grasp here is going to ever be as tight as Hitler's was.
No, I don't think it will be.
No.
Um, Going back to the question before that one, you did briefly mention it. Can you explain now? This really interests me, and I'm sure it'll interest my listeners as well. Can you explain what Action T4 was
Sure.
and how it's often overlooked?
It is, but T4 is an essential linchpin in the escalation of the persecution of the Jews, because T4 basically was an action that started in 1939 in anticipation of the outbreak of the war. Hitler gave an order to his medical staff that in the event of conflict, mercy death, Gnadentod was the word he used, mercy death will be administered to people in mental institutions and handicapped places and so forth, supposedly for incurables. The idea was that casualties would result from the war, and Germany would need the hospital beds. And these people who were to be eliminated were useless eaters. So there were two things. One thing is they needed the hospital beds. The other thing is they didn't want the food supply being diverted. And so late in 1939, this was set in motion. The first killings occurred in 1940. Between the beginnings of the killings in 1940 and the suspension of the operation in August of 1941, about 74,000 German inmates of mental institutions or other kind of sanatoria and so forth were eliminated. They were eliminated first by injections into the heart, but that was a one-on-one process. It took a modest toll, not a very severe toll, on the nurses and doctors who had to do it,
Mm-hmm.
most of whom were convinced this was a good thing. But it took some toll, and over time they developed a process of collecting people from these various institutions and bringing them to special sites where they were brought into shower rooms, and under the pretext of being cleaned, gas was pumped into the rooms and they died.
Mm-hmm.
The gas they used was bottled carbon monoxide made by a factory in Ludwigshafen in Germany. The problem was that as this escalated, they would then have to ask for more. They would have to order more bottled carbon monoxide, and businesses like to know how steady their demand is.
Mm-hmm.
So the business might ask questions about what volume of production do we go for here? That was uncomfortable for the Nazis because the word might get out of what they were doing. So they gradually developed, and this was also in connection with the war, in the annexed parts of Poland, where the institutions were farther separated apart. They developed a practice of collecting people in buses and vans and bringing them to the place to kill them. Well, it dawned on one of these guys who was responsible for this that we can cut out the middle phase here. We can collect them in the trucks, but if we're using carbon monoxide, why not just connect the exhaust into the back of the trucks and kill them while we're moving them? And then we just bring them from wherever we collect them to a crematorium where the body will be disposed of, and there you are, clean as a whistle. So that was what they developed in mid to late 1940, and those personnel who did that first collection and killed the people in the back of the vans with the connected exhaust pipe, they become the staff of the first death camp at Chelmno, and where the gassings occur in December of 1941. In the meantime, by the summer of 1941, word has gotten out about T4 in the German population because the Nazis were careless. They sent out notifications to relatives. Your nephew in such and such an institution has died of appendicitis. Well, the family knew that that person's appendix had been taken out years before. Or all of the cards said the same thing. Everybody died of pneumonia. And these families had networks of support and they knew each other. So that was whispered around, and pretty soon it reached the ears of Catholic and Protestant leaders. Both churches condemned mercy killing, and those leaders began to speak out. So for the Nazis, the operation became uncomfortable. By the summer of 1941, it had killed almost the targeted number that they had originally set, which was 75,000. And so they stopped the operation, and they transfer all of those people who have been part of the killing at these designated sites to the east. And those people follow the advancing armies into the Soviet Union. Some of the trucks are sent east, and there are gassings behind the advancing German lines. The problem with that, though, is that the roads in the Soviet Union are so bad that the truck axles keep breaking. and various other problems arise. So then the notion is settled that now we're not going to use those anymore. We're going to bring the people we're killing to places to kill them. And that's the origin of not only Chelmno, where the vans are used, but also Belchec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, where it's stationary gas chambers.
Yeah.
And they still use carbon monoxide because the gas is generated from captured Soviet tank engines.
No, right. Okay. It's yeah. It's
It's
not a
staggering.
pleasant thing to listen to, is it, really?
No, and it's even worse when you realize that it was low overhead, low tech, cheap.
Yeah, yeah.
They captured the engines that generated the material. There was plenty of gasoline lying around to propel the engines. That wasn't in short supply until much later in the war. The camps they built didn't look. Our image of these camps is so established by Birkenau and the famous red brick gate that the train line goes through and so forth. But Belchec and Sobibor and Treblinka didn't look like this at all.
Mm.
They were basically prefab huts thrown up. The gas chambers, the first generation of gas chambers were two rows of wood with a layer of sand in between, tar paper over the top, and some flashing around the area where the walls and the floor come together, and that's it.
Yeah.
It and then you plugged a Soviet tank engine into this, and it generated the gas. Now, to be sure, a couple of months into this, in the middle of 1942, at those death camps, they say, these gas chambers aren't big enough. We have to have something more substantial. So there's a period of about 3 to 4 weeks where the trains are suspended. And at Belchec and at Treblinka, new gas chambers are built, but they're built out of recycled bricks. At Treblinka, they blow up a factory chimney that's about 15 kilometers away. Then all the bricks tumble down, and they carry the bricks to Treblinka and build the new gas chambers out of this. So it's incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
And that also is just adds to the shock level of this because by March of 1943, which is when the brick gas chambers that we've all seen pictures of at Birkenau, when they first begin operation in March of 1943, at that point, 75% of the victims of the Holocaust are already dead, killed by being shot or by these ramshackle gas chambers at the other death camps.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, um, I want to ask you about something else now. What were the Nuremberg laws, and how did they affect the lives of the Jews?
The Nuremberg laws were passed in the fall of 1935. Passed is, of course, a euphemism. They were decreed in Nazi Germany. What they did is they reduced German Jews to not even second-class citizens. They stripped German Jews of citizenship. They made German Jews could no longer serve on juries, could no longer, they were also removed from all occupations that involved the state. They were driven out of the military, they were driven out of the civil service, all of that. They were forbidden to have any kind of intimate relations with non-Jews. And then, instead of being called citizens, which in German is Staatsbürger, they were reduced to subjects of the German state, which is basically the literal term was Staatsangehörigen, which means belongers to the state, but not citizens. And that meant that they could still carry German passports, though they had a special J stamped into them, so everybody would know that Jews. So that was the law that segregated Germany. Between 1933 and 35, German Jews were subjected to a lot of pressure, but they were not formally, legally segregated. There were restrictions on what they would do. To give you a very powerful illustration, in 1 year, between 1933 and the middle of 1934, more than half of the Jews that had director positions in German companies lost them. That is, they were
Wow.
on the boards of companies, and so
Hmm.
they were they were either forced to resign, they were pensioned off, they were fired. They got pensions at this point. But after the passage of the Nuremberg laws, there then was a sequence of reductions in the pensions. So the Nuremberg laws are this kind of intensification and marking.
Hmm.
These are not like you. They are not citizens like you. They are different. The German Jews did not yet have to wear stars. That doesn't come till 1941 in Germany. It starts in occupied Poland in 1939.
Yeah.
Uh, so nobody has to wear them until then, and then it spreads through Western Europe, and then in Germany it comes in relatively late September 41.
Wouldn't this be a kind of deja vu for the Jews? Because didn't the Romans do the same thing?
I don't know if the Romans did. Medieval people did.
Uh-huh.
Jews had to wear a yellow circle on their
Hmm.
clothing in many parts of Europe. They were also driven out of many parts of Europe.
Yeah.
There was an expulsion from Britain, I think, in 1260. Then didn't Cromwell let them back in, I think. I can't
Hmm.
remember whether he drove them out again or he let them back in. The French periodically expelled them and then let them back in. It was often a money thing in medieval Europe because Jews could lend money, which Christians were formally denied the right to up until
Yeah.
the rise of banking in the 14th and 15th centuries. And so aristocrats and monarchs depended on Jews to provide them credit over time. And sometimes it was useful to have them there. Sometimes you wanted more than they could provide, so you just seized it from them and drove them out.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
this is this sort of erratic pattern that happened throughout Europe.
Now, I hope I get this guy's name right. Zygmunt Bauman.
Yeah,
He argues that the Holocaust is the product of modernity,
yeah.
whereas you contend that it's an expression of extraordinary primitivism and nihilism. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, I mean it does seem there's a Dan Stone is a professor in England at I think Royal Holloway, one of the is certainly one of the colleges of the University of London, and he has written in a book of I think a very smart sentence. He says that the modernity was the setting for the Holocaust, but it wasn't the cause.
Hmm.
The cause was in fact a set of ideas that go back to the divergence between Christianity and Judaism very early in the history of the West when there was a competition between the two faiths and they stigmatize each other in various ways. Then remember that all of the notions of racial purity that the Nazis peddle are basically notions of breeding. It's animal husbandry.
Hmm.
This is fundamentally agricultural. It's you breed certain kinds of dogs together till you get the perfect poodle. That's how the Nazis thought of human beings.
Yeah.
Uh, we actually know that in the world of animals, yes, that works for the Westminster Kennel Club, but it does if you breed too much inward, you will get physical defects. You'll get inbreeding that will cause deformities.
Hmm.
Uh, so the mixing of populations is, in fact, from the point of view of the health of the human race, a positive thing. Um, so the fundamental notions behind this are antiquarian notions or agricultural notions, and even the idea of conquest as the means of national survival is a throwback, because the whole modern world is based on the notion of interaction and trade as benefiting people. Um, the teachings of classical economics, Adam Smith and various other people, are that trade in what you have a particular productive advantage in
Hmm.
is good between nations. It's not a bad thing. The
Yeah.
Nazis were autarkists about this. They were your economy has to be just as self-sufficient as your people has to be pure.
Yeah.
And so connections are broken. That the whole, and this is, of course, another of the secrets or the upsetting things about the rhetoric of the current administration here, because this inward lookingness, this constant us, us, us. We have to be an economy that provides everything for ourselves, is related to these notions of ethnic superiority.
Yeah.
So, the Nazis emerged out of a mental universe which was the very opposite of modern. Now, they did use certain modern means. Bureaucracy is what Bauman is thinking of mostly, and the capacity of harnessing industrial methods. But you'll remember also in the book, I say one of the things that is most misleading about the way we talk about the Holocaust is the phrase factories of death,
Yeah.
because that implies that this was modern. But the only killing installation that bore any relation to a factory was Birkenau. And Birkenau is very late in the game. It's the
Hmm.
culmination of the learning process. Up until then, this has been slaughter, carnage, just an orgy of blood, ugly and inefficient in every way. Um,
Yeah.
Not at all systematic the way it became at Birkenau in 1943-44. So the phrase factories of death and
Yeah. It's
industrial
not.
murder, these imply much more modern procedures than existed.
And all their ideas were ironic anyway, because in his party, he had somebody with a limp, he had somebody who was gay. Hitler himself uh, had a limp and a shaking hand. So it's
Increasingly over time.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
Goebbels had a club foot.
yeah, yeah. Goebbels, yeah,
Worm was gay.
yeah,
Goering was obese. I
mm,
mean, there are all of these. None of them conformed to the
no,
Nazi. Well, Heydrich is the one who looked the part.
yeah.
Uh, Eichmann certainly didn't look the part.
Himmler
Uh,
certainly didn't.
Himmler certainly didn't, and Himmler was acutely self-conscious about this.
Mm,
Um, so, and Himmler was also so obsessed with gays that there are people who suspect that he had his issues
yeah,
because
really,
for Himmler was the driving force in the persecution of gay people.
yeah,
Um, Hitler never showed any signs of particular concern with this. When Röhm, who was the leader of the stormtroopers up until 1934, Röhm was his companion in the rise to power. They were perdu in German. That is, they use the familiar form of the word of the pronoun you. And in Germany in those days, that's a big deal. To be perdu is to be very close.
yeah,
And they spoke to each other as du, not sie. Uh, when Röhm was exposed by the Social Democratic Party's press in the 1930s for frequent affairs with younger men, um, Hitler issued a statement that said, the Nazi Party is not a women's sewing circle. There, these things are part of the political life, and there's a private realm and there's a public realm, and so he didn't care.
yeah.
Himmler,
And also in why, and we've spoke about this earlier on. You address the Allied nations, and can you explain their position, why they didn't do more, like such as like
it comes
bombing
to
the tracks
at
for?
every stage, from the immigration of the 1930s to publicizing the gassings,
Mhm,
about which both Britain and the United States were very well informed very fast, to bombing. The answer is simple. Everyone always had something more important to do. Uh, I referred to the issue of the emigration of the Eastern European Jews and so forth. In the 1930s, the more important thing to do was to make sure that didn't happen. So you didn't open the doors, because then it would be the floodgates.
mhm,
In, in the in 1942, for instance, when the gassings start on a large scale, both Britain and the United States learned within a month of the gassings. Both Britain and the United States, and then we learned by the beginning of 1943 about a place called Auschwitz.
mhm,
In both cases, we suppressed the information for months. And we did that because Nazi propaganda constantly said, America and the UK are fighting for the Jews. And the leaders in both America and the UK thought that if they attacked the killing of the Jews, if they publicized it, it would play into the hands of Nazi propagandists who would say, see, they're all worried about the Jews. And therefore they downplayed this. And they knew that there was some anti-Semitism in both countries at home. They didn't want to activate that against the war effort. So they held back. And then when it came to bombing the tracks, two things to remember. Up until the spring of 1944, no British or American bomber could get to a death camp and back to England or to Cairo. Those were the two starting points.
Mm-hmm.
Get back to those places on a single tank of gas. We could never reach Treblinka from either of those places. Now, in the spring of 1944, what changed was the Allied invasion of Italy had gotten far enough up the Italian boot that we captured an Italian air base at a place called Foggia,
Mm-hmm.
which, if you know a map of Italy in the back of your head, there's this little spur on the boot, sort of a quarter of the way up. That's where Foggia is. We could fly a plane from Foggia to Auschwitz and back. So for the first time, Auschwitz became hittable. And by then, Auschwitz is the only camp still operating. So the first thing is we didn't bomb because we couldn't. But then we become capable of bombing. And why don't we do it? Because this happens in basically late March of 1944. And we have to remember what's going on elsewhere in the spring of 1944. We're preparing D-Day.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming in June. Almost all of the Allied air power was being put to blow up the railroad lines and the bridges that would have resupplied the German forces. Beginning in the summer, a little later, the V1s and the V2s start to rain down on London. They are positioned in launching pads in Belgium and the Netherlands. That becomes the obsession of the Allied air forces. And then finally, backing all of this up, because when we launched D-Day, the Russians are launching their massive offensive on the Eastern Front called Operation Bagration. And to back that up, we concentrated the Air Force on fuel plants, Nazi fuel plants. That's what led to a bombing near Auschwitz, because the Germans had built a synthetic fuel plant about 5 kilometers east of the camp.
Yeah.
And we do hit that in the summer of 1944. But there's always a military priority that comes in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And we do some things. We bombed Budapest on July 4th, American national holiday. We bombed Budapest on July 4th, 1944. And it is that persuades the regent of Hungary to stop the deportations there.
Yeah.
By then, he'd already deported virtually all of the Jews of Hungary outside of the city of Budapest. So 437,000 people had been shipped to Auschwitz, where 3/4 of them went right into the gas chambers and 1/4 were shipped on to German labor sites.
Well, so we always got something better to do.
Always had something more important to do.
I want to talk about the photos that I sent you yesterday. Now, talking about outfits. For those of you watching on YouTube, the photos will be displayed. For those of you who are listening on Spotify, I'll explain the 3 photos that I sent Professor Hayes. One is a woman whose boyfriend, I guess, is taking a photo of her as she poses on the Birkenau tracks. The other is 3 guys or 3 people standing there doing the German salute on the Birkenau tracks. And the other one is a teenager who, for some strange reason, has fitted herself into one of the ovens at Auschwitz. My question is, what kind of mentality do you have to behave like that? Is it the lack of education? Is it they don't care? What is your professional opinion?
Well, the first thing is these are immature people behaving immaturely.
Mm-hmm.
And in the face of the horror, it's a distancing reflex. It's sort of, I this is just they turn it into humor. Of course, it's not funny.
No.
It's extremely there are words that have lost their significance in modern life. It's vulgar what they're doing. People don't use the word vulgar much anymore.
Mm.
It is, and it's immature and it's childish. It may be worse than that, particularly in the case of the Nazi salutes,
Yeah.
because that's an unmistakable thing. I've seen behavior like the crawling into the oven and the other part of it. I've seen that at German concentration camp memorials where school groups are brought through, or even at the Monument to the Murdered Jews of Europe, which is in the heart of Berlin, has all these stone slabs.
Yeah.
There are people who climb on the slabs, who jump from one slab to another as if this is a public park or something. Um, and I some for those people, I sometimes excuse them by saying, well, they had to come. A teacher brought them. They didn't want to be here. They're acting out that sort of resentment rather than anything more significant or meaningful. But these are people, the pictures you showed me are people who have gone to Birkenau.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
easy to get to Birkenau.
Mm.
It's not easy to get there, but even when you come into the train station at Auschwitz, it's a walk.
Mm.
It's Birkenau is some distance from that place. Um, so these are people who are there by intention and yet are demeaning the experience in this way.
Mm.
You chalk it up to immaturity. You education has, uh, there are many people who have no sense of awe anymore. They don't, because we are so visual. Not me, I'm so old, but the younger generation is so visually oriented. Everything is and
Yeah.
and everything is selfies. And so when you go to a place like that, the proper attitude is a kind of reverence,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of awe that you are in a place where extraordinary things, horribly extraordinary things happened.
Yeah.
That should scare you and intimidate you a bit. And instead, it's reduced to look, mom, I'm at Auschwitz. Um, I suppose
Mm.
this is a price of the educational process that we do. Some people are not going to have that feeling. And there's not much you can do, I suppose, except shame them.
Mm-hmm.
Even that may not work much, because for them, this is just another site to see and to record that I was there. Um,
It's terrible. I know that they've started arresting people now for doing the Nazi salute. They arrested a guy who tried to steal a part of the track
yeah,
for
yeah,
a souvenir, which is like, why would you want something that evil in your home? I just don't
right.
understand it. But some people are just going to be stupid, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and there, uh, I was asked at a talk I gave up in at the University of Wisconsin recently, and it said, you've been studying this all these years. What's the bottom line? What do you take away? And I hesitated, and then I said, some people are just no damn good, and that's what you have with the example of these pictures.
Yeah, yeah,
That's their form of being no damn good.
yeah.
Then there are the people who buy the whole ideology hook, line, and sinker. They become guards. They become torturers of people. Some people are just awful.
Yeah,
And the challenge for many of us in life is to make sure those people never have power.
yeah, Yeah.
And that's the, and there are, to not forget that this can happen if you don't keep those people out of power.
Yeah.
And of
Sure.
course, this is why now in America, many of us are deeply concerned because some of those people have gotten power.
Yeah. Some very dangerous people.
Yep.
And following on from the photos, what do you believe is the most important message for the new generation to understand the Holocaust?
The, the most important thing is to understand that the Nazis were horrible to everyone they inflicted pain on. The Slavic populations of Europe, the Jews, of course, all of this. But not to forget that among the worst pain they inflicted was on their own people. Uh, you think of the images of German cities in 1945. The Nazis brought that on those people because they persuaded a nation to dedicate itself to an ideology that cared about no one but themselves. It was, the Catholic Church got a lot of things wrong about fascism and Nazism, but one of the things they got right is that the popes condemned Nazism as idolatry. And that's what it was. It was self-worship.
Yeah.
It was worship of the Aryan folk. And that kind of self-worship, which then extended to economic self-sufficiency, conquest, we can do anything we want because we're superior, that is fundamentally self-destructive. And because the main purpose of this subject has to be to prevent it from happening again, you have to address the populations who are potentially the populations that would make it happen again.
Yeah.
You have to teach the majorities what the cost to them of persecuting the minorities is.
What role do you think historical study plays in combating Holocaust denial?
Well, we talked ourselves blue in the face about this. The Holocaust is one of the best documented events in human history.
Mm-hmm.
We have oral documentation. You can go to the National Archives in Washington. You can listen to a captured SS recording of Heinrich Himmler's speech at Posen in October 1943, when he told the assembled leaders of the SS, most of you know what it is like to wade into blood. It was this explicit, is what he said. And so we have oral descriptions of what happened. We have physical remnants. We have the crematoria and the gas chambers at Auschwitz and at Majdanek. We have all the testimonies of people who lived through it on both sides. We have testimony from guards, from people who said, yes, I did these things, and from the victims and so forth. So you can't say this is biased testimony to magnify what happened. We have enormous documentary evidence. In some cases, we have the manifests of deportation trains that list every person on the train and where they go. And then we even have, from some of the camps, the death lists, because they kept meticulous records. Now, at the end of the war, they tried to destroy all of this, but they didn't succeed. So the Holocaust is over-documented in a host of ways. To try to constantly reprove that is, you're clearly dealing with people who don't want to hear what we know. They simply deny it. That's it. I don't think there's much you can do to win those people over. You can just outgun them, if you will. You can just provide more and more information until they are marginalized. So that the role of people like me is to tell the stories, to explain over and over again what happened and why, to make people aware that if it could happen then, it can happen again. And that's it. Now, whether people can, in times of extremity, see beyond their own noses, whether they can be made to understand there's something larger at stake than your grocery prices or what you're most worried about tomorrow, that's a hard sell at any time. and place. The mass of people, the great broad majority of people have trouble focusing on the near horizon or the far horizon. They're looking at today, tomorrow, and the next day. But the whole point of education is to take us out of ourselves and out of our momentary self-interest and to see the world bigger than that.
Mhm.
So that's what our role is.
And who would you say your book was best aimed at?
Oh, the unicorn, the literate layperson, the person out there who wants to know, but is not going to read 15 books on this subject or is
Yeah.
not have the time. You know, I sometimes in public lectures, particularly when I'm talking about more specialized topics, I say, I've read all these books, so you don't have to. Uh, that's and that's part of what I'm doing with this book. I'm trying to bring together the best of what we know from people who have meticulously figured that out and make that accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
So and again, it began as a teaching book. It was addressed to 18 to 21-year-old people who wanted to know something about the subject. And so it was now, to be sure, I taught at a selective university. So these were people of above average intelligence, but it was a broad audience. It was not all people who were studying history. Many of them were studying engineering or communications or something else. So the literate layperson who's curious. That's who this book is for.
Awesome. Professor Peter Hayes, thank you so much for joining me today. And my final question to you is, what is next from yourself?
Oh, I had a book that came out just this spring from Cambridge University Press, which is called in English Profits and Persecution: German Big Business in the Nazi Economy and the Holocaust. And it's a study of, when I got into this subject, the first thing I wrote was a book about the largest corporation in Germany called IG Farben,
Mm-hmm.
which is the company that built that synthetic fuel factory 5 kilometers east of Auschwitz. They
Yeah.
built it partly with slave labor, and that was the work that brought me into the study of the Holocaust. And so over the years, I've had kind of two tracks. One is they're overlapping tracks. One is the study of the Holocaust, and one is the study of German big business and politics.
Yeah.
And so this is a book about that. Um, it's it's addressed to a little more specialized audience, but the compensation for that is it's shorter.
Well, the book that we've been talking about today is Why Examining the Holocaust. It's an excellent read. Like I said before, it's a little bit scary because it could happen again, but it's a terrific read and I highly recommend that to anybody. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been awesome. I could talk to you all day about this. So thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Bye-bye.
For those of you still with me, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Thank you so much to Professor Peter Hayes. I loved this conversation. It was awesome. I learned a lot, even though I have read his book, even though I have read a lot of books on the Holocaust. I did learn from Professor Peter Hayes, and I'm so glad that I spoke to you. So thank you so much for joining me. And his book, Why Explaining the Holocaust, is in a link down below. Now, next week, we shall be joined by Frederick Taylor, and he is going to be talking about Dresden. The bombing of Dresden is highly controversial. Some people say that it was a war crime. Some people say that it needed to be done. You make up your own mind. You listen to next week's discussion, and you can tell me. Leave a message in the comment, and we'll see what you have to say, because you are a member of this community. You are a member of the briefing room, the same as I am, the same as my guests are. So please leave a comment on any video that you see about any subject that you see, and it'll be highly appreciated. So, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week with Frederick Taylor. Take care.